Everybody. Friends, honourable guests, the motion before you tonight, and about which you have just heard many excellent speeches, is this House believes that the commercialisation of pride has done more harm than good. Closing the case for the proposition, I'll be making one argument. First, as has already been made clear, I will highlight how the commercialisation of pride has distorted the original message of pride, and then building upon that, I will argue that this commercialisation of pride is part of a wider capture of radical movements by corporate capitalism that results in an identitarian distraction from progressive politics. It's not the job of the proposition here tonight to argue that pride is a bad thing, by no means, but rather it is our burden to demonstrate that more harm has been caused by its commercialisation than good. You can believe that that amount of harm is small or vast. You can believe that it's a pressing issue or not. But if you are convinced there is more harm as a result of pride's commercialisation, then you must vote side proposition when you walk out of this door at the end of the next speech. Before I begin, I'd like to briefly offer a little rebuttal. We heard earlier that pride has let people engage and get more momentum, that that's a positive outcome of corporate pride. I would say that the corporate attention that's been given to pride has only happened after the fact, after hundreds of thousands of activists have spent decades advocating for LGBTQ people and LGBTQ culture to become popular and mainstream. It is only companies co-opting pride after the fact. They haven't done the hard work, other people have. If we are balancing good versus bad, the good done by companies is a moot point at best. Orion's point about croaks. Funding. We've heard that corporations offer a huge amount of funding, but actually we're talking about relatively small amounts of funding coming from corporations to do with pride. And in fact, a lot of the time, the corporations are very dodgy. You might have heard of the Human Rights Corporate Equality Index. It ranks companies on the basis of their commitment to LGBTQ issues. Well, of the top 100 companies to have received 100% on this index, the likes of Walmart, Comcast, AT&T, 25 of them, the top 25, donated $10 million to anti-LGBTQ politicians in 2021, the last time we had that metric. By the way, the largest pride protest anywhere in the world, in New York City, where Stonewall began, has a budget of 1.7 million. So 10 million versus 1.7, that doesn't quite work out to me. The average corporate donation to a pride event is £30,000. The point of corporate pride leading to funding is bankrupt. Next point of rebuttal. We've heard that pride promotes queer history, but I would argue that it dilutes it. You can't rely on small shops, mum-and-pop stores, to compete with the behemoths such as Target, which earlier this week pulled pride displays from all of its shops. Target's the 8th largest corporation in the US, employs some 500,000 people. It removed pride-related goods and historical information on the basis of it no longer becoming profitable. It decided to stop supporting the LGBTQ community the moment that it didn't stand to make money. And we also heard that pride helps people with mental health. I'd completely agree. That's pride. That's the solidarity of other members of the LGBTQ community and their allies. That's not corporate pride. It's not the corporate pride that, if anything, further alienates gay people from one another once their identities have become commodities, once the symbol that stands up for the centuries of oppression becomes something that you can buy, a temporary Twitter banner that expires after 31 days. We've got to this point without corporations, and we don't need them to go further. In fact, the moment that we become dependent on structures and organizations that will abandon you, the moment it becomes unprofitable, movements such as pride lose their soul. I don't think the case for the opposition is particularly strong at this point. So let's move on to yet another body blow. We've already heard about the history of pride, starting in Stonewall in New York City and escalating to being one of the largest protest movements across the globe. I think that in the decades since pride has gone from a few thousand people in Greenwich City to being an international phenomenon, the iconography of pride, that rainbow flag perfectly presents how the commercialization of pride has caused more harm than good, because it shows what has happened to pride at an increasing rate in the 21st century. Capitalism has co-opted it. It's been described by academics as rainbow capitalism, pink capitalism, homo capitalism, the appropriation of the aesthetics of pride by the forces of capital to create performative progressivism. And I say progressivism because it's not a real word, just because the kind of advocacy that companies engage in is equally ethereal. It's not real. It doesn't exist. When they say they support the LGBTQ community, what they're really doing is nothing. They're swiftly changing their logos, releasing thematic merchandise, and issuing statements of support to receive press coverage and perhaps boost sales from so-called pink money. It's cynical. And it's a widespread tactic that in almost every instance betrays a complete apathy for the actual cause of the LGBT community. Another company that received 100% on that metric I mentioned earlier, Bay Systems, probably most famous for creating the bombs that have been dropped over the Middle East and much of the rest of the world by American military interventions. They say on their website about pride, our group in DC walked 1.5 miles on one of the hottest days of the year, whilst our Boston group marched a little more than 2 miles to a cheering crowd, met with shouts of "We love Bay Systems," high fives and hugs. I can assure you that Lockheed Martin, another 100% company, which in fact donated significantly to the Republican Party last financial year, has an equally superficial and actually facetious stance on these issues. And I think this leads in to the fundamental point about the appropriation of pride by forces of global capital. It's described by sociologists as the process of recuperation. It's where political radical ideas become co-opted, absorbed, and then diffused within commodified capitalist media and culture. They become interpreted through neutralized, innocuous, socially conventional perspectives. Think of the way the image of Che Guevara, that great revolutionary. Think about rock music, ripped jeans, or tattoos. Is there any better example of a once revolutionary symbol that represented, for millions of people, the first outlet that they had to be treated with dignity and hope? That pride flag now turned into something that you see filling up bins at the end of parades, made for nothing by the same Chinese laborers in a country that has one of the most appalling records on civil liberties and human rights. Marx and Engels, in the Communist Manifesto, wrote, "All fixed, fast, frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profane." To me, there is something poignant in those last words. Something that was once holy. That pride flag that represented so much to so many has lost its meaning. Now it decorates the companies that behind the scenes perpetuate the hatred towards the gay community felt by their senior members behind the scenes, that represent something that can appear for a month and disappear the next. Or, for the worst companies, such as BMW, they don't even bother putting a pride flag on their Twitter account for the Middle East. I think that it is extremely clear that for all of the good at emancipating and creating better social conditions for the millions, tens of millions, the gay community across the world, they have one another, their brothers, their sisters, to thank for that. We have never to thank the people that would stab this revolutionary movement in the back the moment it became unprofitable. I have never felt more pride to propose. Thank you.